Hey, what up? So, here's the thing. I said I'd give my thoughts on Rise of Skywalker back after I saw it. And I kind of wanted to do a video on it for some time, but I just kind of didn't. And I guess this is that. And while yes, it is because I am partially lazy, it is also because there was just something about it that just felt off to me. And I think I've kind of got what I want to say about it figured out. Alright, so first things first, out of the way, obviously, yeah, spoilers and shit. So right off the bat, let's talk about the elephant of the room. Yeah, Emperor Palpatine came back from the dead. It was stupid. And here's the thing. It was done before. In an old storyline before the prequels called Dark Empire in the books. You can look it up if you want. It's pretty much one-to-one what they did. He gets a clone body and he comes back and he does crazy Force shit. And it is god-awful. Nobody liked it then. Nobody likes it now. And even though I'll admit I haven't fully read through the whole thing yet, I can tell you for a fact that they probably didn't fix most of the glaring issues of that or add to it in a unique way. And plus there's no real build up to it. It just sort of happens. Like, if you're starting out planning a trilogy from the very beginning, and you have Emperor Palpatine coming back as your endpoint, there was no trail there. And I guess that was sort of a problem with Dark Empire too. He just sort of comes back one day and he's all like, yep, I'm back. It's time to fucking fuck shit up. Yeah, and literally everything I've been able to find on Rise of Skywalker, these are, go look up criticisms of Dark Empire. It's the exact same ones. Clone Palpatine, babies. Because basically what happens is his soul leaves his body and goes into clone bodies, and the clone bodies degenerate all fast, which is why he still looks fucked up. Except the only difference is at least Dark Empire wasn't set so far afterwards. We still had, your boy Luke being the focal point and shit. Still had those guys and that original cast in the story. So, I guess that was a plus of that as opposed to this. Honestly, that bothers me, but that's not the only thing that bothers me about that movie. Something else that bothers me is the fight between Rey and Kylo on the Death Star. How do I put this? You know those stages in Street Fighter? Literally all of them? How pretty much, they're just a flat, level playing field. And while that's good for a video game, that's sort of what we got in the movie. They're just sort of fighting with the Death Star in the background. Okay, you can't have Rey jumping around the wreckage of the Death Star and shit. And Kylo Ren, hacking at her from below like this, doing a Tarzan versus Clayton thing. That was a good movie, Tarzan. Yeah, they couldn't have, like, it's so uninventive. My uncle said that it was a lot like a messy hand job. Or not a hand job, a blow job. You enjoy it, but you kind of wish it was better, like you're glad you have it. And you know, it's that's a pretty apt comparison because, like, this movie is clearly trying to please you, but it sucks at that. It sucks really hard at doing that. Because it's just sort of going for, like, fan servicey moments. Man, it's hard to breathe in this thing, so if you hear me, like, snorting around and shit. But yeah, it's just so, like, people say that The Force Awakens just sort of feels like a clone of A New Hope. And that's just sort of safe. Well, this movie sort of does that. Like, it feels like a clone of Return of the Jedi in some respects. Oh, but fun fact about Dark Empire real quick. I'm bouncing back and forth. This is very much like in the moment. Apparently, the Emperor came back twice, actually. There was a Dark Empire 2. So, I mean, yeah, we saw him get completely destroyed in this one. But that doesn't mean his soul still can't leave his body and find another clone body and do it again. Like, and that was, like, the number one problem with Dark Jedi was that, or not Dark Jedi, Dark Empire, was that, sorry, I'm very all over the place. Like, once you do that, you open the gates to something you can't close. There's no way you can't bring back the Empire, or the Emperor again now. Like, you're kind of just stuck doing that. God, I feel like Darth Vader in this fucking thing. You know, maybe if I do that. There we go, getting a little bit more air in now. But, oh my god, it's just, it's so, you know what? People say that for Star Wars in general, that whenever the newest movie comes out, it makes you appreciate the last few that came out before it. And I've been seeing that happen with Last Jedi, so that, I feel like that speaks to how bad this movie is. That's making us appreciate aspects of what we considered the worst of the sequels. Man, what else? What else? Sorry, it's just that movie was very bland and uneventful. And there was so much to forget aside from, like, the Death Star fight. Which, as I explained earlier, could be, like, way more fantastical. Like, think about it from a symbolic and narrative element. You're fighting in, essentially, the carcass of the Empire. You're fighting in the bones of giants. Of an evil so great and grand and all over the place that it's pretty much foreign to the people fighting in it. Like, they can't, like, they were both born well after the Empire. Or at least Kylo Ren was. So, like, they should have no idea how big and bad the Empire was. And it should be like, whoa, They built, like, this crazy big thing. But then again, I guess the mystique is lost when you consider they built an even bigger thing. A bunch of, Space ISIS guys built an even bigger super weapon than the Space Nazis. Which I guess is... God. And at this point, I'm just... Like, why? Why did they feel the need to do a super weapon? Another Death Star, basically. There is a whole wealth of crazy shit that they could have drawn from in Star Wars, in the old continuity. And that's sort of what I thought they were doing when they erased the old one, that they were going to retell some of those older stories, but a little bit cooler. Like, you know what? They could have brought in the Starforge. How cool would that have been, the Starforge, for those of you who've played the Old Republic games? And you know what? I know the whole, like, fighting in the bones of, like, factions long gone could work for Star Wars really well. Because they did it with a world called Jabim. Basically, before the prequels came out, Lucas forbade any books and movies and shit to take place in that era until he was able to make the movies and shit. So, what you got was the Battle of Jabim being sort of like Luke, Leia, and Han go to this planet Jabim. They all hate Luke because he's named Skywalker, and Anakin Skywalker showed up and was kind of a dick. You know, standard stuff. And you see old, decrepit Republic walkers. Like, they couldn't write in the era itself, but they could create prequel-era technology by doing that. And those walkers and shit showed up in Attack of the Clones. And it's crazy, and it's neat continuity. And honestly, that's the thing I think a lot of people don't really understand about, like, George Lucas and... Sorry, this thing gets, like, really hot really easily. Hang on. Like, that's the thing they don't understand about, like, Lucas and his love for Star Wars. I mean, in some respects, he hated Star Wars because he was always meddling with it, which sucked. But there were aspects, like, of Star Wars, like, he was a very eccentric person. Like, to give an example, I was watching the documentary Toys That Made Us. They were talking about Star Wars toys. And how, in order to fill a new price point, they created, like, little walkers that they said were just off screen in the movies. And George Lucas ate that shit up. Like, they just straight up made up a new thing that he didn't have control over, and he loved it. He didn't feel like a certain negative type of way. He wasn't... Like, the things he was controlling of are oddly specific. And I know I'm, like, walking around in circles here, but it's just so odd. Like, why not retell a better Star Wars story than... Like, why Dark Empire? Why? Why? Of all the things to be stricken from canon, that was probably one of the better things to just be gone. Like, yeah, please don't come back. And they retold that. Why not the Yuuzhan Vong? Why not the Thrawn trilogy? Why not Heir to the Empire? Why not any of the better stories that you could write a whole trilogy out of? God, this thing is... Alright, you know what? I think I've said my piece. Why? Just why? And the answer is, there was no why. It just sort of happened that way because they couldn't come up with a good, compelling story because they had a tug-of-war between two different directors who wanted very different things. And say what you will about Lucas, he had a set vision for both the original trilogy and the prequels for the most part. I mean, there were changes along the way, obviously, but There's a structure there. Like, he didn't just kill off Darth Vader in the first movie and then have to figure out who to fight next, because he planned around the possibility of there being a sequel. And while early scripts for, like, Empire Strikes Back and stuff are, like, radically different than what we got, like, it's still all pretty coherent and a solid story, you know? And the prequels are the same way. The prequels, somehow, they made a story worse than the prequels. Like, if you think about the prequels thematically on, like, another level, maybe I'll do a whole separate post about that. But if you think about the prequels on a thematic level about what they say about politics, like, it's very nuanced and deep, actually. Especially for a quote-unquote kids movie. Like, there's a lot to dissect from those. Maybe I'll do a whole video on that. But I think too many people just sort of said, oh, this is boring, it's politics, whatever. And honestly, that's one of the few things I disagree with, like, you know, Red Letter Media, for instance, on. Like, politics can be interesting if done correctly. And I think the prequels and a lot of the material that surrounds them actually does a really good job if you pay attention. Because essentially the prequels are about some guy using victimhood to grab power and continuously do that and manipulate people emotionally in order to gain power, and then use that power on the people he emotionally manipulated. Like, there's a through line there. Like, think about it. The Emperor met Darth Vader when he was 9. Like, and his whole plan was to make him his new apprentice from the start. From the moment he laid eyes on him, he was just like, yeah, this dude's ridiculously strong in the Force. I'm gonna fucking gaslight and emotionally manipulate this child to make him, like, my slave, basically. And that actually works well with Anakin's story, because he's originally a slave anyway. So essentially he just trades masters until Return of the Jedi, when he chooses freedom. Which is one of the things that makes his character so great. Is that he died free. He cast off the yoke of oppression himself. So yeah. And that's another thing, like, the prequels tie in pretty well narratively with the original trilogy, as I just outlined there. Because, and this is one of the things that George Lucas is right about, Star Wars isn't about really much outside of... It's a soap opera about the Skywalkers, basically. And now the Skywalkers are all dead. So that kind of sucks. I mean, you can have good Star Wars stories outside them, but... I don't know. Just such an unceremonious... Like, how do we end this? And how do they continue off of this? Like, are they gonna do a 10, 11, 12? Maybe eventually, but I don't think they can do it off of these movies. I think they're gonna have to scrap them and do a whole other sequel trilogy. Which isn't unheard of. I mean, a lot of people point out that, like, Dragon Ball GT basically did that. Like, oh, it's terrible, so let's scrap it and do a new sequel. I mean, I don't know. I think they could get away with it if they really tried. But I think if they do, I think they need a break from Star Wars, and I think they need to take some time to figure out what makes those movies good, because I don't think anyone at Disney truly knows. And I think very few people actually understand Star Wars, believe it or not. I'll detail that a little later, I guess, but yeah, that's it.